Some things don't need to be said, they still ring loud and clear. Like how a single glance can slot someone into the exact category that society has quietly prepared for them. Not because they're wrong, but because they're black. That morning, at the boarding gate, he walked up wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit, an old watch resting quietly on his wrist, a first-class ticket in hand, polite demeanor, everything in order. But just one look, and the woman behind the counter paused. Half a second. Not long enough to file a complaint, but just long enough to humiliate. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" The question snapped out like a reflex, one she never asked the white man standing behind him. From one look, one sentence, one doubtful nod, an entire staircase of silent bias began to unfold. And at 36,000 feet, he didn't lose his seat. He lost something else. The belief that being qualified was enough to be treated fairly. Welcome to Racist Exposed, where we unpack the cold slices of real life. Situations no one wants to talk about, but everyone needs to see. If you've ever felt injustice because of your skin color or social standing, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because these stories don't tell themselves. And justice doesn't just happen on its own. Now picture this. You're standing in the priority lane, every document in place, every achievement earned, every reason to belong. But all it takes is one look from the person guarding the gate to reposition you. Not because you're wrong, but because you don't look like what they expected. Just 1 second, just one look. And from that moment, everything begins to shift off course. Pay close attention. Because some acts of racism don't show up in words, they live in the slowed rhythm of silence. 6:10 a.m. at the international airport. The usual noise had settled into a kind of professional silence. Everything moved across a cold, flat surface of procedure, brisk footsteps, the steady roll of suitcase wheels, a disembodied voice announcing boarding with robotic indifference. Elijah Carter stepped into that flow without resistance. No hesitation. He knew exactly where he belonged, business class. His gray suit had no flashy logos, but the cut hugged his shoulders perfectly, and the hem of his pants hit just right above his shoes, clearly tailored. White shirt, pale gray tie, polished black leather shoes, a cognac leather briefcase, real hide, aged by time, not by wear. Elijah didn't care to show off. He preferred just enough to avoid suspicion, and just too much to escape scrutiny. He stepped into the priority lane. In front of him, an older white couple. The man wore a navy blazer, ticket in hand. Turning his head slightly to glance at Elijah, a quick reflex, almost subconscious, as if silently asking, "You sure you're in the right line?" No one said a word. At the counter, Elijah handed over his boarding pass. The attendant, a white woman in her 30s, blonde hair pinned tightly back, took it with one hand. The other remained on her screen. There was a pause, just a beat slower than usual. Not overt, not intentional, but real. "Elijah Carter," she repeated slowly, like testing a password that had just been denied. Her gaze finally landed on him, not on his eyes, but on his skin. That half-beat hesitation, half a second, but the kind of second that sees you, truly sees you, and decides you don't quite fit the image. It wasn't an unfamiliar look. He'd seen it at conferences, walking up to a stage, at five-star hotels, standing at the front desk, at restaurants, inquiring about a reserved table. A look that never says, "You don't belong here," but always asks, "Are you sure?" "Elijah Carter," she echoed again, as if scanning her internal system for a mismatch she couldn't name. Her finger hovered on the screen, then paused, not because of a technical glitch, but because she wasn't confident in what she felt. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. The system needs to re-verify some information. Could I ask you to step aside for just a moment?" "Is there an issue with my ticket?" His voice was calm, measured. It wasn't a protest, just politeness dressed like inquiry. "Oh no, not exactly. It's just a formality. Sometimes the system has duplicate names or delayed updates." Elijah understood. This wasn't the first time. He stepped aside, not annoyed, not flustered. But with every footfall, he carried the weight of a personal history, a history that was always asked to be verified again. Behind him, a white man in a pink polo and khaki pants stepped forward, salt and pepper hair combed back. No questions, no scanning, not even a glance. Beep. Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Ellison. The boarding gate opened like a golden door. The man walked through as effortlessly as walking into his own living room. Elijah watched, not jealous, not angry, just taking note. Someone else moved forward. He was held back. And the reason never appeared on any screen, only in someone's gut. The agent returned, a faint hint of apology on her lips. You're all set, sir. You may board now. Sorry for the delay. Elijah said nothing. He didn't thank her. Because that apology wasn't for him. It was for the silence she couldn't explain. He retrieved his ticket, stepped through the gate, every step a slow-motion reel of someone who's been asked to step back just because his skin doesn't match someone else's expectations. But before he left her line of sight, Elijah turned back, not to look at the line behind him, not to glance at the man who had passed with ease, but to look directly at her, the woman at the counter. She was still processing tickets, head slightly lowered, but his gaze pulled her up. That moment lasted no more than 3 seconds. No words, no defiance, just a look steady, quiet, unflinching. The look of a man not asking to be accepted, only saying, I saw you, and I saw how you saw me. She blinked, a slight nod, an apology. Not for a system error, but because she had just been seen through the very lens she used to see others. Elijah turned and walked away. No need to win, because sometimes, in a world designed to push you one step back, not stepping back is the deepest form of resistance. The business class cabin greeted Elijah with soft lighting and the scent of cedarwood blended with worn leather. Each seat was its own little cocoon, where silence came wrapped in ticket prices and social status. He walked toward the front row, seat 3A, window side, the ideal spot for a long-haul flight. His name was already displayed on the digital seat tag. But the man sitting there wasn't him. A white man, probably in his 50s, lounged casually with an iPad, noise-canceling headphones on. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge Elijah. Elijah hesitated. He checked his ticket, then the seat number again, 3A. A flight attendant approached, white, platinum blonde hair neatly pinned, lips painted in a muted nude as if trained not to convey emotion. Hello, sir, can I help you? This is my seat, 3A. She tilted her head slightly to check the screen. Oh, it looks like there's been a system mix-up. Would you mind taking seat 24D at the back for now? This is a business class ticket, Elijah replied, his voice calm and low, like reciting a prayer he knew by heart. Yes, I understand. But that seat has already been assigned to another passenger. I'm very sorry. No one asked the man to move. No one even addressed him. No one apologized to Elijah for the displacement. Because everyone had already silently accepted that this swap made sense. A black man standing beside a seat that had been taken, and a system that remained silent so it could continue to happen. Elijah didn't cause a scene. He didn't call for a supervisor. He simply nodded a quiet nod, like a period in a sentence that refused to end. Then turned and walked to the back, each step peeling back another layer of injustice. The higher the class, the quieter the bias. And the quieter it is, the harder it is to accuse. He sat in seat 24D economy class, aisle seat, surrounded by scattered chatter and the rising warmth of a crowded cabin. The space was tight. The armrest trembled. No personal screen. No one knew who he was. No one noticed. He glanced back toward business class. The curtains were now drawn, like another world, sealed off in silk. But the curtain didn't just block space. It blocked the right to speak. A black flight attendant passed by. Her eyes paused on him for a second, then quietly turned away. Less than a minute later, she returned, pretending to check the overhead bin. She leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry. I saw what happened, but they said the seat was reallocated due to a system issue." Reallocated to who? The question wasn't sharp or loud. It sliced like a cold blade clean, bloodless. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because speaking it would mean betraying the system that kept her employed. Elijah turned away. 1 minute passed, then 2. He sat still, didn't pull out his phone, didn't check his email. He just sat there, a man who had done nothing wrong yet still displaced, in a space he had paid for, yet pushed out like a smudge on an otherwise pristine page. He didn't lower his voice to make peace. He didn't raise it to reclaim his seat. Because what had been denied today wasn't just a chair, it was the idea that someone like him ever truly belonged in it. Elijah opened his briefcase and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Inside were handwritten notes, drafts of speeches, diagrams for a new education app, blueprints for a training model he was set to present in Geneva. He turned to the first page, then paused. In the seat back pocket in front of him, the Airline's in-flight magazine. On the cover, his own face, sitting in a conference room, whiteboard behind him covered in algorithms. The headline, "Black Tech Visionary, Rewriting the Algorithm of Access." There he sat, in this cramped space, displaced from the cabin he paid for, just beneath a manufactured image celebrating the success of people like him, but never making room for them when it mattered. The irony was bitter and perfect. He smiled faintly, a smile no one saw, then closed his notebook and leaned back into his seat. There was no visible anger in him, only a cold clarity that this time, he wouldn't let it slide. Because the body cam in his jacket had recorded everything, from check-in to curtain. And this time, the story wouldn't vanish behind silk. It would be exposed. Elijah was sitting quietly when a voice came from the seat to his right, hesitant, but clear, as if the speaker had rehearsed it in his head a few times before speaking. "Excuse me, are you Elijah Carter?" Elijah turned his head slightly. The man looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a denim shirt, black-rimmed glasses, and had the demeanor of a high school teacher, curious, cautious, and respectful. Elijah nodded slowly. "Yes." The man chuckled softly, unable to hide his sincere excitement. "I knew it. I watched your TEDx talk in New Orleans. Access isn't a favor. It's a right. I've shown it to my students a few times. They said you looked like a tech teacher who's as cool as a rapper." Elijah gave a small laugh. It was part gratitude, part fatigue. Not quite that cool. The conversation ended there, but the air around his seat subtly shifted. Someone recognized him. Then another. The young woman in seat 24B turned around. "Wait, you're Elijah Carter from STEM Lab." A small ripple spread. In that unmistakable economy class way, no noise, no photos, just murmurs and nods. Someone texted. Someone pulled up a photo. Someone tapped another passenger on the shoulder. Within minutes, Elijah, the man removed from seat 3A, was the most quietly recognized person on the flight. But he didn't look pleased, nor did he seize the moment to explain or defend himself. He just nodded politely, then looked down and reopened his leather notebook. Fame had arrived at just the right moment, but Elijah knew better than anyone. If a name can be what gets you accepted, it can also be taken, twisted, or misunderstood just as easily. So he didn't rely on his name, he relied on the truth. And the truth was being documented, minute by minute. As the plane reached cruising altitude and the overhead chime faded, flight attendants began passing out warm towels and drink menus in economy. Movements resumed their rhythm like every long-haul flight. A female flight attendant approached, black, petite, early 30s. Elijah had noticed her eyes during boarding. She had seen everything. But she hadn't intervened. She walked past his row, handing out towels, her gaze lingering less than a second. Then she returned, this time with the drink tray. As she placed a glass of water on his tray table, she leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Carter." Elijah looked up. She didn't say anything else. She simply placed a folded piece of paper beneath the cup and walked away as if nothing had happened. He waited a few heartbeats before unfolding it. A woman's handwriting, slightly slanted but firm. "They think you're staff. I'm sorry." 8 words, but they sliced across his forehead like a cold gust. Not because they were shocking, but because they confirmed what he already knew, yet no one had dared say. She wasn't the first to notice, but she was the first to write it down. And in a system trained not to record anything, a handwritten note was a ticking time bomb. Elijah folded the note not to pocket it, but to tuck it between the pages of his notebook like a sacred bookmark. He didn't glance at her, didn't gesture, didn't say thank you. Because among people of color in spaces like this, silence can be a form of gratitude. Elijah said nothing else for the rest of the first leg of the flight. He read, took notes, dozed off briefly, drank water, stared out the window. Every action small, unremarkable except for one thing. His phone was still on. Recording, placed under the tray table, exactly where it could capture every nearby conversation, including the brief exchange during boarding, the ticket verification, the seat reassignment. And that wasn't all. In his chest pocket, Elijah had clipped a mini camera, a prototype his company once developed for classrooms where students were at risk of abuse. Smaller than a coin, designed to blend into a shirt button. That device had captured everything at the boarding gate. The skeptical glance, the white man being let through without question, Elijah being asked to step aside for no stated reason. He hadn't planned to use it, not today, not on this flight. But Elijah was no longer the man who let things slide to keep the peace. He knew some truths, when spoken, are dismissed as exaggeration. But when backed by data, image, and emotionless audio, they become undeniable evidence. And this time, he wouldn't need to raise his voice. He just needed to hit share at the right moment. Seat 24D was cramped. The seat in front pressed against Elijah's knees as if this space had been designed for people without height, without power, and without a choice. He closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. The flight would be long, but the memories were longer. An image surfaced, rising from the dark like an old reel of film, a 17-year-old black teen, gray hoodie, faded sneakers, standing in front of the library at Claymore Public School, the one with a giant sign that read, "A safe space for every learner." Back then, Elijah only wanted to print out his history class presentation. He came early, arms full of handwritten drafts inside a dog-eared notebook. But just as he crossed the gate, a white security guard blocked him with an arm as stiff as a metal railing. "You're not in uniform. Rules say no entry." "I just need 5 minutes to print my slides. I'm a student here." The guard didn't bother making eye contact. No badge, no polo, no entry, policy. No one stepped in to explain. No one asked why a black kid with eyes brighter than the morning sun was turned away, while 3 white students in sports jerseys strolled past like nothing happened. Elijah stood still, heart pounding, throat dry, fingers clutching his notebook, but not tearing it. He turned around, back straight, and walked step by step toward the empty parking lot. That evening, the group turned in their project missing his part. He got a B grade. No one knew the real reason. Except him, and the system, a system that never wrote black as the reason, but always operated as if it was. That night, Elijah wrote a single line in the small notebook his mother once bought at a dollar store one day. "I'll rewrite the rules." Not out of revenge, but to redefine fairness. By the age of 17, he already understood something most adults never did. Racism in the modern world doesn't wear chains or carry whips. It wears policies, doubt, a blocking arm, and a system that never admits it's wrong. Elijah began learning to listen not with his ears, but through data. He documented how teachers reacted differently when white students turned in work late versus when black students lost theirs. He counted how often he was asked for student ID compared to others. He even once installed a tiny mic in his backpack to record the tone of the school receptionist when he called in to report a missing book. Every experience was an unwritten line of code, a hidden algorithm of injustice operating beneath the surface. By sophomore year of college, after earning a computer science scholarship, Elijah began developing a tool, bias signal. A system not designed to accuse people, but to force the system to examine itself through the mirror of its own data. No emotions, no outrage, just statistics. And in a world that worships logic, statistics are hard to dismiss for long. The phone Elijah had placed under the tray table wasn't just recording. It was connected to bias signal and AI that tracks and analyzes voice patterns, word choices, tone, response delays, and interaction dynamics from both sides of a conversation. On this flight alone, the system had already captured the hesitation in the flight attendant's voice as she read his name, the lowered tone when asking him to step aside for verification, the difference in response time between white and black passengers, the frequency of words like sorry, system, and policy when applied to black individuals. This data would be encrypted, categorized, and output as a metric disparity index, a behavioral gap indicator, something that's never been machine measured, until Elijah redefined the concept of justice. In the pocket of his gray vest, the tiny camera kept recording. Elijah knew he didn't need to yell, didn't need to call the press, didn't need to live stream, because this time, discrimination wouldn't be denied due to lack of proof. This time, the system would be forced to face itself through the very data it created. And Elijah only had to do one thing. Wait. The plane touched down on the Geneva runway at 7:04 a.m. Morning light streamed through the window, golden, cold, polished like metal. Elijah didn't rush to stand. He waited until the economy cabin rustled into motion, the sound of seatbelts unbuckling like soft firecrackers. Then he took out his phone and opened the video app. He didn't need to rewatch the entire clip. Just checked the lighting, the angle, the clarity of the audio. Everything from the flight attendant's skeptical glance, the just need to verify your ticket line, to the moment he was asked to move to economy was captured clearly. No dramatization, no cuts. Elijah opened Instagram, his personal account. Elijah Carter, not an influencer, not a frequent poster. His last upload had been a photo of a whiteboard in his office, captioned "Build systems that include, or be the reason someone breaks." He uploaded the 2-minute, 13-second clip, no filters, no background music, no hashtags, just a single caption. This is the altitude of bias. He didn't criticize the airline, didn't tag anyone, didn't name names. But he knew silence can sometimes echo louder than accusation. Within 3 minutes, the post began receiving likes from educators, tech communities, and civil rights leaders he'd once worked with. At the 10-minute mark, a DEI diversity, equity, and inclusion expert reshared it, writing, "The most dangerous form of racism is the one hiding behind policies and apologies." Minute 23. Black Tech, a major community account, reposted. Minute 39. A journalist who had once interviewed Elijah shared the video on X Twitter, with the note, "This man builds systems to measure bias, and today he just proved why it's necessary." And Elijah, he was waiting by the baggage claim, AirPods in, no music playing. His eyes fixed on the automatic doors opening rhythmically. He didn't call attention to himself. He didn't need to, because once truth is seen, it moves on its own. Elijah's video didn't need an algorithm to go viral. The truth in it was enough. 2 hours later, a high school teacher in Atlanta posted a clip from the video with a question, "Business class ticket. Valid boarding pass, yet asked to move to economy. Is this a system error or a system with errors?" The hashtag #ThisIsBias began to trend. Then altitude of bias, then flying while black, each one, like a needle piercing the thin veil of airline civility. By hour 4, the video had surpassed 4 million views. On Black Twitter, it became the center of discussion. Civil rights activists dissected every frame tone, glance, posture, timing. Every detail was another line in a familiar script replayed for far too long. Elijah didn't speak up, didn't post again, didn't reply to inboxes, didn't open the comments. And that silence only intensified the momentum. The account for Color of Justice reposted the video, captioning, "You don't need to shout, You just need not to delete. Truth stands on its own. 7 hours later, major news outlets picked it up. Headline: Black CEO with business class ticket denied seat. Airline under fire. The article didn't just recount the incident. It profiled Elijah, founder and CEO of an AI education platform, TEDx speaker, Harvard scholarship recipient, grew up in South Baton Rouge's public schools. Elijah Carter became a symbol, not because he intended to, but because the system exposed itself by choosing the wrong person to exclude. Exactly 12 hours after the post went live, the video hit 12 million views. No music, no voiceover, just a black man being asked to step back while the nation stepped forward to ask, why? The next morning, as Elijah stepped into his Geneva hotel, his phone began vibrating non-stop. Not social media alerts, emails. From the airline, subject regarding your recent flight experience. The message was brief, cold, and templated like the hundreds sent after similar incidents. We regret the inconvenience experienced during your recent flight. The airline is conducting an internal review to clarify the events in question. We remain committed to improving the experience for all passengers. Please accept a $300 voucher as a gesture of our apology. No mention of the word discrimination, no mention of the video, no reference to the forced downgrade. Elijah didn't respond. He forwarded the email to a journalist, without comment, because the story had already moved beyond a bad flight experience. It had become a living case study for DEI trainings, for conversations about unconscious bias, for an industry forced to ask itself what it had normalized for too long. And worst of all, for the airline. The man they pushed to economy wasn't just any passenger. He was the one holding the tools to expose the system. Elijah stood by the window of his hotel. The Alps glowed under fresh snow and morning light. There was no hatred in his eyes, only the cold clarity of someone who had just clicked upload and was letting the world decide which side of history it stood on. 3 days after the video went viral, while the internet was still boiling hot like asphalt at noon, Elijah received an email with no subject line and no clear sender. Its content was a single sentence. This isn't the first case, and below it, an attached PDF. Elijah didn't open it immediately. He forwarded the file to his cybersecurity team to scan for malware. Only after it was confirmed safe did he read it. It was a 17-page internal report, extracted from the airline's passenger complaint system. The first line read, "Confidential, for internal use only." Inside was a list of customer complaints from the past 2 years, coded by color: red, priority for investigation; orange, slow processing; gray, case closed. Among them, nearly 70% of complaints filed by black passengers were marked gray. No follow-up, no explanation, no apology, just quietly disappeared off the radar. Some passengers had clearly documented their experiences, asked for extra identification despite having valid tickets, moved to economy due to a system glitch, denied lounge access due to capacity, even when seats were available. All had one thing in common: no consequences for those responsible. Elijah sat still. The hotel room suddenly felt too quiet. The letter wasn't signed, but at the end of the document, there was a scanned handwritten note. "I don't know if this will change anything, but at least now, I'm no longer part of the silence." Elijah read that line again and again. He didn't need to know who sent it, only that. The wall was beginning to crack from the inside. Elijah didn't hold a press conference. He didn't live stream a statement. He didn't file a lawsuit. Instead, he quietly published a post on his company's website titled "Project Signal Fly because Data Doesn't Blink." The post described an open-source initiative, a flight interaction scoring system that allows passengers to anonymously rate staff behavior and flag disparities in treatment based on race, gender, or language. Signalfly was built on 3 principles. Voluntary logging. No video required, just text or symbol-based reports of interaction. Bias analysis AI would detect passive-aggressive language, indirect discrimination, or coded phrases like "I'm afraid." Policy requires, unable to verify. Community reporting. When a particular route receives frequent reports, Data is added to a public dashboard, transparent, no personal names. Within 48 hours, thousands signed up for the beta version. Fairflight, a passenger rights organization, immediately requested collaboration. Several small airlines sent emails asking to discuss implementation feasibility. But the most important responses came from those who had once been silent. Flight attendants, ground crew, internal coordinators. They began submitting old emails, discarded incident reports, drafted apologies that were never sent. All carried the same message, we knew. But until now, we had no place to ask the questions. Elijah wasn't trying to take down an airline. He was simply fulfilling the vow he made at 17 to rewrite the rules using data and a silence too loud to ignore. 2 days after Signalfly launched, 3 of the airline's tech partners announced they were suspending collaboration pending internal transparency. The check-in software vendor withdrew from the boarding gate upgrade project. The customer service AI provider requested a full audit of the complaint handling model. And a biometrics startup where Elijah had once served as an advisor publicly cut ties with the airline. But the hardest blow didn't come from code. It came from public relations. 48 hours after global media began using phrases like moral paralysis in the aviation industry, the airline's chief communications officer, a white woman once praised as the human face of the company, submitted her resignation. Leaked internal reports revealed she had repeatedly urged leadership to speak openly, take accountability, and pledge corrective action. The board responded with one line: "We can't let a single incident damage the entire brand." She responded with action, resigned, left quietly, no press conference. Just a final update on her LinkedIn. This wasn't an incident. It was the outcome of a structure protected for far too long. The system was beginning to tremble, not because someone shouted, but because too many had stopped being silent. And Elijah, the man once pushed out of a business class seat, was now redefining the seat for an entire generation of black travelers. On a new Access Data, Dignity and Truth. 4 days after arriving in Geneva, Elijah received another email from the airline, this time with a clear subject line and a signature from a regional vice president. "We sincerely apologize for your recent unsatisfactory flight experience. As a gesture of goodwill, we are pleased to offer you a complimentary first-class ticket for your return flight." Someone on his team said, "That's an apology. You should take it." Another added, "You could screenshot it and teach them a lesson." But Elijah simply read the message, then clicked Move to Trash. No reply, no post, no story. Because what he needed was never a free seat. What he needed was a rightful seat for those who never had one. In silence, he went to the airline's website. Return flight from Geneva to New York. Flight 998. He didn't pick a seat. He booked the entire business class cabin, paid with his company credit card, and left a note. Private group reservation. Educational. No PR, no press release. He just emailed the principals of 3 public schools in South Baton Rouge where he had once studied. Subject? Honor Passenger Program for students who've never flown international. 14 students were selected. All were black. All had straight A's and good conduct. Some had never left their state. Some had never set foot in an airport. Elijah didn't call it revenge. He simply wrote in his journal, "The quietest revenge is lifting up those once denied in a way no one dares to question." On the day of the return flight to the U.S., Geneva Airport bustled like any other day. But at one small corner near the business class boarding gate, a group of American high schoolers in school uniforms chatted with excitement. Some carried backpacks, some clutched travel guides. One wiped away tears behind thick glasses as she saw her passport stamped for the first time. Another kept staring at his boarding pass like it might be taken away. Elijah stood a few steps away, blazer with no tie, hands in pockets, looking more like a student advisor than a CEO. A female check-in agent approached and whispered, "Mr. Carter, the students have been seated in business class as requested. Thank you for this." He nodded. "Thank you for saying my name correctly." As they boarded the plane, a few passengers glanced over, clearly not used to seeing a group of black students occupying the entire business class cabin. But no one said a word. because this time, every ticket was valid, and the one who paid for them no longer owed anyone an explanation. Malik, 15 years old, sat by the window, his hand trembling as he placed a glass of orange juice into the sleek silver cup holder. "Did Elijah Carter really book this flight?" he asked softly. Elijah buckled his seatbelt beside him. "Who else?" he smiled. Malik stared at him, wide-eyed, then smiled back. As the plane lifted off, the engines hummed beneath the seats. A moment of stillness filled the cabin, not the silence of anxiety, but of first-time wonder. Elijah glanced at Malik, a 10th grader on his first international flight, eyes shimmering as he pressed his face to the window. "When I was your age," Elijah said quietly, "I was kicked out of a library for wearing the wrong shirt." Malik looked up, not fully grasping it, but he felt something deeper than the words. "And now?" he asked. Elijah simply smiled. "Now, I book the whole cabin, so students like you never feel like strangers." The plane ascended past 10,000 feet. Sunlight poured through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the leather seats. Elijah looked around the cabin, 14 black students, crossing America's borders for the first time. Each one a story, no selfies, no scrolling, just the quiet experience of a moment they never imagined possible. He leaned toward Malik, just loud enough to hear. "Make this flight count. Not for the seat, not for the likes, but because when a black person reclaims dignity by opening doors for others, they don't just reclaim a chair, they redefine what altitude means." When the flight landed at JFK Airport, the American press was already waiting. Not at the arrival gate, but online, on podcasts, on every major and minor news outlet. A CEO who flies with purpose. That was how a New York Times journalist described Elijah in a 3-page feature, accompanied by a photo of the business class cabin filled with 14 radiant black students. Forbes called him the man who broke the bias algorithm with a single click. The Atlantic wrote the man who turned a moment of rejection into a blueprint for the entire airline industry. And CNN ran a commentary titled "Elijah Carter, a quieter act than any protest." Everyone rushed to invite him for interviews. "Were you angry? Do you see this as a personal victory? Can technology really change bias?" Elijah gave no answers, no blog posts, no official statements. He only appeared in one photo, taken and shared by one of the students. Elijah, elbow on the armrest, hand resting against his face, gazing out the airplane window, the endless blue sky and soft, foamy clouds behind him. The photo went viral. No hashtags, just one simple caption. "He let us rise." Elijah's leadership didn't come from a microphone, a stage, or a whiteboard. It came from his choice not to fight back with rage, but with design. He redesigned seats, flight paths, and the very way we measure respect. A black leader doesn't have to shout to be heard. He only has to act early, precisely, and deeply enough that the system has no choice but to recalibrate. 3 days after the students returned home, a flight attendant assigned to Flight 998 did her routine business class check before the next departure. She moved row by row, inspecting screens, tray tables, seat belts, and seat back pockets. At seat 3A, she pulled out a folded note. No logo, no signature, just a single line, handwritten in soft, slanted pen. "The sky doesn't discriminate, but people do." She looked around, half expecting someone to step forward and claim it. But the cabin was empty. Only early morning light spilled through the windows, casting quiet across rows of amber-brown leather seats. She tucked the note into her breast pocket, didn't hand it to her supervisor, didn't post it online, just kept it as a kind of private memory. Later that afternoon, she told a colleague. He didn't raise his voice, but the whole flight knew who changed the air. The colleague nodded slowly, like someone rearranging the seats, but really redrawing the entire flight map. One handwritten line in a seat pocket, no spokesperson, no media campaign, and still enough to cause stillness. Sometimes that's all it takes to expose a system not by attacking, but by contrasting it, its absurdity, placed next to something as simple as fairness. At 36,000 feet, no one hears a scream, only data and outcomes. On the public dashboard of Signal Fly, red indicators made up 72% of feedback involving racial bias across major airlines. Within 10 days of Elijah's flight, over 40,000 evaluations were submitted. Elijah didn't have to say a word, didn't have to name names. The system was now forced to have the conversation, to launch internal reviews, to listen in ways it had long refused to. At 36,000 feet, Elijah sat silently by the window. No more requests to step aside. No more suspicious glances. No more. We need to verify your ticket. And most importantly, he no longer needed to prove he belonged. He didn't fly for revenge. He didn't fly to become a symbol. He flew because he understood altitude isn't just a number on a screen. It's a choice between reacting and rebuilding, between retaliation and redesign, between shouting and letting silence do the work. This story began with a seat denied, but it didn't end with reclaiming a chair. It ended with a question for everyone who ever believed a seat was a privilege, not a right. And from that altitude, Elijah Carter didn't just change a flight. He changed the flight path of a system. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.